Thank you very much, Charlie. You mentioned that I was the longest-serving trustee. I know that that means I'm the oldest, but you were kind enough not to put it that way. It is true that for more than 3 decades I've been boring the American people with what I call the undeniability and unsustainable of our long-term, emphasis long-term, structural debts and deficits. I didn't realize how boring I had become until I was introduced the other day by Winston Lord, former ambassador to China. And Winston, in introducing me, said he'd been down to Guantanamo interviewing the prisoners. And he had found that threatening them with the speech by Peterson on long-term debt was far more effective than waterboarding. So I'll try not to reach that level. But I do believe that this long-term debt, and I emphasize the long-term, is perhaps the primary threat or a primary threat to the economic future of this great country. I'm not accustomed to putting my money where my big mouth is, but when I had a windfall and our company that I co-founded went public, I had to make the decision of what to do with this money. And I read an article that influenced my life in which Kurt Vonnegut and Joe Heller are visiting the oceanside home in the Hamptons of a hedge fund operator. And it's a magnificent mansion. And Vonnegut said to Heller, "Doesn't it bother you that this hedge fund guy makes more in a day than you made selling Catch-22, your great book, all over the world?" And Heller says, "No, because I've got something this guy doesn't have." And of course, Vonnegut said, "What in hell could you possibly have that this guy doesn't have?" And Heller said, "I know the meaning of enough." And it had quite a profound effect on me because I had enough, in my view. That led me to devote virtually all of what I got from that public offering to this cause. Now, I've been surprised and disappointed by a number of developments with regard to the field, but 2 in particular, beyond the debt limit debacle that we suffered through this summer. The first is how glib and unanimous we all are, including economists, about the need for much more investment in R&D, in math and science education, in infrastructure, in skills training, in investment of all kinds. And where in the face of long-term debts reaching an unsustainable level, according to the Congressional Budget Office, of 20%, we intend or propose getting the resources to invest. So our foundation asked the Peterson Institute for International Economics if they would do some projections on not only debt levels, but interest costs out in the future. And using what struck me as fairly conservative estimates, not a big bump in interest rates or whatever, their best case estimate was that in 25 years, 13% of the GDP would be consumed paying interest costs. Now, of course, these interest costs buy us nothing. They're about the past. They're not about the future. But in the face of those burdens, I think the question, and Dave, I'm sure, spent a lot of time thinking about this, is where are we going to get these critically needed resources if we don't do something about this unsustainable burden. My second disappointment was to read Tom Friedman one day, and he wrote that those of us in business were quote unquote MIAs, missing in action, on this critical subject of the unsustainability of our long-term debt. So it is in this context that I praise and introduce Dave Cote. Dave, as you perhaps know, was one of two business leaders to serve on the Simpson-Bowles Fiscal Commission and not only vote for its recommendations, but to go out and speak publicly to build support for these recommendations among the business community, among policymakers, and the public. Dave also signed on to the CED's standards for the Joint Select Committee. These standards state that the business community, along with other responsible Americans, must hold the so-called select or super committee to account and must demand an honest, resolute response to the debt crisis. Time is obviously beginning to run out. In addition to serving on the Simpson-Bowles Fiscal Commission, Dave was named co-chair of the U.S.-India CEO Forum by President Obama. He has served on the forum since July 2005. He's received the Corporate Social Responsibility Awards from the Foreign Policy Association and the Distinguished Achievement Award from the B'nai B'rith International in 2011. I'm happy to introduce one of the truly true great business statesmen in America, Dave Cote. Dave.